Yeah. Right.
Hey, folks, Zach Osterman, now Insider, Indianapolis Star, Mike Niziolek, Bloomington Herald Times. Mind your banners post-game for number 8, Indiana. I guess we should start concluding the ranking at this point. Number 8, Indiana, 20, Michigan 15, Mike. I think the maybe the irony of all of it is we're sitting here talking about 10-0 Indiana beating the reigning national champion, and it feels like maybe the first time they've walked off a field this season genuinely not playing particularly well. Michigan had something to do with that. I thought Michigan's front 7 was particularly good. If you're Indiana, there's an extent to which you want to keep pushing yourself. There's also an extent to which you just want to, I think, appreciate the ride you're on, and balancing that is probably fair.
Yeah, it was a weird game. I sat down to write some observations, and it's like, the defense played really well, and the offense really, and even after the game, couldn't pinpoint like what exactly happened. I think they all wanted to kind of watch the film to get a better sense of it. Obviously, I don't think they held up front as well. And Drew Evans, for those missed it, was announced. Their starting left guard was announced. Kiff suffered an Achilles injury in the week leading up to the game, days leading up to the game after the media availability on Tuesday. So you could kind of see some of that kind of happen in the second half. But it was sort of weird because they had gained over 200 yards in the first half and looked. They hit a couple of
first half was fine. It was like 220 something to like 93 in yardage, and they were up 14. They looked fine.
The players were, and even Signetti wasn't like there wasn't much that changed. They did differently defensively. We just sort of struggled. Didn't make weren't as crisp. Missed some plays that we usually make. There was a couple of drops. There was a couple of missed throws by Curtis Rourke. So it was kind of a weird second half for them offensively, and then the defense just did what it had to do to kind of scrape by and get them across the finish line. I think, one thing that stood out to me was the clear advantage. We've seen this multiple times. It's also in the UCLA game that Indiana had on the sidelines with Curt Signetti as their coach. Moore, the times he entered Alex Orji into the game destroyed Michigan in the first half.
Yeah.
They missed on 2 third downs. Or was in the first drive of the second half. He fumbled once. And then you mentioned I was kind of writing, but the timeout took 30 seconds to take a timeout at the end when the clock was going down.
Yeah,
just
that was bizarre.
And you saw Signetti, and I think where he's talked about a lot is, look, my record in first in one possession games is tremendous.
Mm-hmm.
Look at my resume, Google me. He's mentioned that a lot. They haven't played one this year, but now they do, and the coaching advantage that he has, his experience, his sort of grasp of, we talked about game management situations earlier this week, was just on clear display, I think, for me tonight, that helped them make up for some of the offensive inefficiency that they had.
I think the first thing I don't know if I feel compelled to say it, but I think it does stand out is like this defense has kind of lived in the shadow of its offense for a lot of this season, and that's because the offense has been outstanding. It's been one of the best in the country, one of the most efficient. We've talked about their passing numbers, their efficiency numbers, their red zone numbers. But this is genuinely a really, really good defense. And I know Michigan's not a good offensive team at all, but we're not just talking about this in the context of this defense having a good day against one team. I'm sitting here trying to think how many Big Ten teams have scored 3 touchdowns against this defense. Northwestern did, Maryland did, UCLA did not, Washington did not, Nebraska did not.
Weird list that did.
Michigan, it kind of is, because 5 of the 7 teams that Indiana has played in conference play were held to 2 or fewer offensive touchdowns, if I'm not mistaken. And you're right, it is kind of a strange list. Like Maryland, I guess that was a weird game in the rain, but no sacks tonight, I don't think, or did they wind up with one? They did not wind up with any, but they had a lot of pressures. Davis Warren was just being forced all over the field, break and contain. His pocket was non-existent at times. Michigan only rushes for 69 yards, which I think we both kind of talked about. If there was a way home for Michigan offensively in this game, you felt like it was going to be maybe they can kind of get something going on the ground, establish the interior run. But Michigan as a team averages 2 yards per carry. That is obviously an outstanding number against anybody in conference play. And the defense won the game. The offense just, at one point in the second half, Indiana had negative yardage.
It was after the first 4 drives. That's what I was adding in my story. I was adding those yards up. It was, the interception.
They were put in some terrible spots. That interception that started
second.
I think it was the second. Was it the first drive of the second half or the second drive?
First play.
The first offensive snap of the second half for Indiana was an interception that put Michigan first and goal on, I think, the 7, and Indiana keeps them out of the end zone. They had some other situations where they forced Michigan to kick short field goals. You could obviously see some of Michigan's lack of faith in its offense, even, like it was like 4th and goal at the 1 or 4th and goal at the 2 or whatever. Not the 1, but I think the 2 and the 3, or maybe the 3 and the 4. They just had no interest in trying to score touchdowns. They just said, give us our points and we'll try to add it up.
2-point conversion. They got the stop there.
Yeah, which was another one where they pressured. I mean, he was on the run like crazy. Michigan's not a very good offensive team at all, but it really hasn't mattered who Indiana has played. This defense has been this good.
Well, I think
pretty much all year.
The difference is that they were put in really bad spots. You mentioned the interception. Yeah. Drew Evans had a rare 2 bad punts, but one was only like 25 yards. James Evans, and it bounced backwards. And so they had to. And this was the only time they had that really bad field position consistently. The opposing team had good field position and put the defense in bad spots throughout the game. One thing I thought was interesting for this game, and I wrote about this. This was my last point, kind of in my initial takes, was that Lady Luck was kind of against Indiana tonight. We talked about Evans being out. Miles Price suffered an injury, was knocked out at the end of the first half. Justice Ellison didn't look the same after he got knocked out of the game briefly. They had a targeting call go Michigan's way in terms of Jameer Johnson starting corner was knocked out. I think when we talk about these kind of historical seasons and runs, especially for teams that maybe don't have 5-star talents, luck has something to do with it. And staying healthy, this team has been remarkably healthy. Curtis Rourke, I was looking back, I was like that's the only starter that missed a game this year for Indiana. The other start that got missed was D'Angelo Pons. He missed a half for targeting. Those were it. And so obviously Nick Kidwell's kind of exception that happened before the season, but all the expected starters were in every game. Tonight they had to deal with some things, and I think that's why Curt Cignetti was sort of in a rare. He allowed himself to say, look what we did was impressive because we had to overcome.
Yeah, he was
some a tough hand that was dealt that we haven't faced kind of this year.
He was at pains to say we didn't play well enough. We got to get better, but he was also I think you could detect a little bit. And listen, I think you could detect a little bit more pride. He said something like, "I don't throw out many bouquets." We all know that. Some of that's going to be the performance. Some of it's just going to be it's not lost on him that this is. I mean, this is now literally the best Indiana team ever. It just is. Statistically, Indiana's never won 10 games in a season until tonight. There was an energy on the sideline at the end of the game.
You just the 1976 team. We're ready to play right now. Right?
1976?
1967 team.
I was like the 32-0 basketball team.
1976.
I have bad news. I think
the 1976 team would like a word.
The 1976 team, I'm a little bit worried. Hello, Ant. How you doing? I think after Ant brings up a good point in the comments, best of 3. The one thing I'd say that probably Cignetti's proud of, and also something Indiana had to learn about itself tonight, was Indiana would not want to play that game again anytime soon. That is the most physically challenged, I think it's fair to say, they've been this year. And what I mean by that is literally blocking NFL-level defensive tackles, dealing with an offense that's built around a physical offensive line. And again, I don't want to overblow what Michigan is, particularly offensively. And we knew this too, right? We said in the pregame, in our weekly podcast, we said this is going to be the most NFL talent Indiana's seen across the line of scrimmage. That may be a better defensive line than Ohio State's. I mean, I don't think the defense overall is necessarily better, but I think that defensive front, at least the front 4, is better, and Indiana really struggled with it. You talk about the sack numbers. Curtis Rourke, I think, had been sacked something like 5 or 6 times seven times all season. He had 4 tonight alone. And so, there's something that I think Curt Cignetti is probably pleased with, in the sense that his team gets a challenge it had not had to face all season. You talk about his role, and I thought this was a really good coaching job on his part. But I think he can also look at some of these players and say, now you've lived that. You've lived blocking an NFL defensive tackle. You're going to have to do that again if we're going to go where we think we can, where, we're kind of now the opportunity in front of us. Switching to the offense, I mean, they didn't play well. And you're right, what is befuddling is They looked really good in the first half. Like Curtis Rourke, he I think he missed 2 of his first 3 passes, and then he went something like 7 of 8 or 8 of 9. Like he hit like a real run. It was a lot of the stuff we've seen them do all year. Something that Nick Baumgartner, a friend of mine who works for The Athletic, did a piece on Rourke this week for just kind of looking at his draft stock and where things stand. And one thing Nick pointed out is how good Rourke is against pressure, and that touchdown pass he had to Elijah Surratt with, a pass rusher bearing down on him was kind of evidence of that. You felt like, despite the fact that, yes, Michigan was more talented on the front than what Indiana's really seen this year, Indiana was handling it well. And somebody asked, Caleb asked, did the line struggle because of backup? I actually thought it was the right side of the line that probably struggled a little bit more than the left side of the line tonight, for whatever reason.
They seem to be getting pressure more on the edge, too, on both sides.
Yeah.
Up the middle, just sort of collapsing the pocket on them.
But what is strange is, like, everything was kind of on schedule until it wasn't. And Curtis Rourke said post-game that from his vantage point, he said, I'll have to watch the film, but it didn't seem like Michigan did anything dramatically different to what, in the second half to what they were doing in the first half, changing coverages, things like that.
Coverages changed.
And he said no. Now listen, maybe they did, or maybe maybe you just need to watch the film to know for sure. But it was just kind of strange. It was kind of the first time we've seen Indiana's offensive rhythm just sort of abandon it.
Yeah,
this season.
Well, but I mean, when you point to the rushing numbers, 28 carries for 40 yards. Like I said, Allison took that really huge hit.
Mm-hmm.
I think he only touched the ball a couple times after that.
Yeah, he did come back, which Miles Price didn't. But
Miles Price was injured. He's a guy that volume-wise probably doesn't get as much as in an offense that didn't have as many weapons. But he's kind of like that guy where you get him out in space and it's like kind of an electric little. You can give the team a jolt.
And they lost
Price.
Right. Price.
Both of them have done that because they're both veterans. And I looked up Miles Price played 51 games. This was his 52nd game. Both of those guys are really important cogs to this, important pieces to this offense. And I think they missed them tonight. And then the offensive line, how much was it communication? Did they miss a piece and just were they worried about that? How much did that impact them because it was late in the week? We won't know, but the strangeness of it was that the first half looked so,
it didn't start at the beginning and they just had to grind out all their drives. Like there were times where it looked fluid and, free flowing, and they were gashing. They were gashing Michigan on some runs, kind of that sort of zone edge run they do with Lawton, who was their leading rusher. He had 55 yards.
And I asked Kurt Cignetti, did he sense, because he said that the interception was a bad start. Obviously that's a bad start, but in terms of like how that set up the second half of the offense. But did that lead to any sort of nervousness or because he said they just missed, there were throws that were just missed. Like
Rod
had a drop.
Yeah, they were.
Were they pressing a little bit? He said he didn't see that. Maybe he would, I don't know if he'd give an honest answer if they were, but just sort of a strange offensive half. Michigan's got a good defense, and Michigan would probably want to run back with Will Johnson at corner because that would have probably helped him in that.
Yeah.
But we haven't seen that, and maybe it's just the talent. But I think he was disappointed, obviously, in the offensive performance despite the win.
I think there are a couple other things worth bringing up. Number one, Keyshawn Williams, that punt return was really important. Like, have we seen him return punts this season? I feel like we've seen him field a couple. That's obviously normally Miles Price. Williams is their backup on punts specifically.
He had one this season, I think. It was the Western Illinois, just in
Okay, so the point is he's the established backup. You don't switch that position very often unless people are making mistakes or somebody gets hurt, like what happened to Miles Price. I also think it is worth, and I got to scroll over here on Mike's got the box score open on his computer. Forgive me. Niko Radicic, Indiana's really not asked much of him this season, but what it has, he's literally been perfect. He has not missed a kick in a game. He's already set a program record for extra points in a season. I think the 41-yarder tonight was his career long. I thought it was interesting. If you're looking for hints, there was a point in the first half where Indiana had something like 4th and 12, and it would have been about a 49, 50-yard kick, and they didn't put Radicic on the field. They went for it. So that maybe gives you a sense for what Kurt Cignetti.
Well, he had said in the preseason that it wouldn't have even been him in those long kick situations.
Yeah, you're not talking about a kicker that you're going to put out there to try like a 52-yarder at the end of a game, maybe. But again, I mean, like that fourth quarter kick in the end is kind of the one that ices the game in the sense that it makes Michigan play that last drive like it needs a touchdown, not just a field goal. And I think you see Michigan pressing. I think you see Michigan. I mean, listen, I've covered plenty of games where Indiana was on the other side of games like this, where they kind of found something unexpected. They dug their heels in. They got it back close, and then you just felt like it was kind of one bridge too far. That's what Michigan to me looked like on that last offensive series. But I bring those up because I've done these report cards all year, as you know, and week after week, I find myself just sort of saying, special teams had another good week. They didn't make any mistakes. Everybody made all their kicks.
But it's almost like it's like they just haven't had an impact one way or the other.
Yeah, there have been one or two. I mean, Miles Price has had a couple big punt returns, but like in general, it has been a phase of the. If you think about it, all three phases: offense, defense, special teams. Like it has almost kind of been like it's been a net positive just because most of the time it's not hurt Indiana.
Correct.
And tonight is different because tonight is the first time that you see that special teams unit go out and basically make the plays. That group can point to its contribution and say, we win this game because of this. Radicic hits those 2 field goals. Guess what? That's the difference in the game. Keyshawn Williams, that big punt return when nothing's going right for Indiana. The crowd's nervous. I thought the crowd was really good, but any crowd is going to be nervous in that moment when they've seen, they know their offense has kind of lost all its rhythm and kind of can't find its way forward. That punt return both got the stadium back into it and also set up, I think, that second field goal that kind of got the final score to where it was. I think it's just worth bringing up because, there's something people say about really good goalkeepers in soccer, which is that the best ones can play for the best teams and they can go 80 minutes without having to do anything because their team's so good. They don't allow any shots, any chances. They don't have to save anything, get involved at all. And then, boom, out of nowhere, a ball bounces funny over somebody's head and they have to go make a great one-on-one save. Like, this special teams unit has kind of just been allowed to do its job and not a lot more most of this season.
But wouldn't the defense be the goalie in that case?
But the defense has had – the defense was engaged in the game the whole way through. The special teams unit had to step up in kind of key moments after a season where, again, it's not like we've seen Indiana make –
I think that was a forced soccer because you're a soccer fan.
I think it works fine. I think you have anti-soccer
It worked as much as that vest. Was that last week?
That vest worked great.
It did not work.
That vest worked fantastically well.
Do we take the game, I don't know what much more there is to say about the game itself. Big picture with the rankings. I was just looking it up. Georgia lost. And Miami lost.
Yeah.
And so
there's another, the other one that I think people will want to keep an eye on, and obviously if you listen to this on Sunday, you'll already know the result, but Utah-BYU is tonight. I think BYU's at Utah. Utah's not great. But Kyle Whittingham
Tennessee is winning 14-7 right now over Mississippi State.
Tennessee's going to win that game. I wouldn't worry about
that. What does this do for their? Because I think you mentioned earlier in the week that you didn't think this would jump them up over Tennessee or Penn State. Are they ranked ahead of Georgia, and are they ranked ahead of Miami?
I think there's a world where they're ranked ahead of Miami. I'm not positive they will be, but like Miami, the only thing Miami's really got going for it is I think a win over Louisville. And that kind of has something to cancel it out now. And, we'll see what the committee thinks of Michigan. We'll see what the committee thinks of struggling against this Michigan team specifically. It is worth pointing out, like, Georgia and Miami in the seeding were already occupied the 2 automatic bids or buys or, whatever you want to say for the top 4 conference champions. So if those remain the top 2 ranked SEC teams, and I guess it's possible Georgia drops behind Texas. I don't know if Indiana can jump Georgia
with 2 losses,
but Georgia's gonna. I mean, maybe like it's possible. Georgia's
now that seems more
but
disrespectful to people talked about brand bias and things like that. That seems worse than anything that has happened this week, putting them behind just a 1-loss.
And that's probably fair. Maybe they do. I mean, it's possible.
So Terry says they're dropping. I don't think your guys are dropping.
I don't think Indiana's dropping, and at least not very far, if for no other reason than because I don't know what anybody's going to do behind Indiana. Like I guess BYU winning at Utah,
I mean,
maybe, but
you think so. I mean, you think that they needed to. We talked a little bit about he talked about style points. Even Segeni mentioned style points. That they weren't going to win any for the first time this season. Not that anybody
in the BCS or whatever he said in the BCS.
But I mean, I think it speaks to: is it better that it was a close game and Michigan showed that its defense is an NFL caliber defense and that you still win, or do you think it's better? I mean, because if they blow them out and then this win doesn't mean anything, like if they get killed by Ohio State. I mean, if Michigan plays Indiana close, Ohio State close, that makes the win mean more instead of they get blown out twice in their last 3 games.
I think a couple things. Number one, if you're Indiana, I think you're curious if you move ahead of Miami, because whether Miami grabs that automatic bye or not, if you're ahead of Miami, that means it's going to be easier in theory for you to lose a game and still stay ahead of
all these results are good
an
for
ACC at-large team.
It puts them up, like you're saying.
It is, I think, relevant to ask the question about Georgia and like what the committee does and what that tells us about its thinking, because you're looking at a scenario where you see a lot of 2-loss teams out of the SEC. Alabama or LSU could be a 2-loss team. Georgia's now a 2-loss team. Tennessee, if they lose in Athens in a couple weeks, could be a 2-loss team. A&M has 2 losses right now and hosts Texas at the end of the year. So it's in theory, it's possible those both wind up 2-loss teams. I don't expect the SEC obviously to get shut out of the playoff at all. But like it, I think we are.
I think SMU's now first in the ACC, so they would be the.
Do you think? But do you think Miami is going to fall behind SMU? SMU is what, 14th?
Yeah, I don't know.
Or 13th? I don't think Miami's falling behind SMU.
They had a win against Pittsburgh.
I mean, that's fine, but I don't think Miami's fallen 10 spots.
Georgia Tech's pretty bad.
Georgia Tech's bowl eligible. I mean, they're not great, but they're not terrible. It wasn't like they went on the road and lost.
I think it'll be a more interesting discussions this week. I think with the
I think you'll get a better sense
of where they stack.
Yes, exactly. I think what you will get is a better sense of how much credit the committee is going to be willing to give Indiana for achieving the way that it has against a schedule that ultimately does not have a ton of heft to it compared to some teams that have played tougher schedules but have not performed at the level that Indiana has. And I think the committee, to a certain extent, is going to look at one game and say, listen, like everybody has one game. Like everybody, even the best teams have a couple games they got to grind out, that may be a little bit unexpected. But I think this week tells you more about sort of how the committee is going to stack up, let's say, we're having this conversation under the assumption Indiana loses at Ohio State, because if they don't, then it's irrelevant. Like if Indiana goes 12-0 and wins
this week in the next 2 weeks.
No, but like I'm saying, if we play the tape through to the end, we are kind of having this conversation under the premise that Indiana loses to Ohio State and goes 11-1. Obviously, they need to beat Purdue. If they beat Ohio State and beat Purdue, it doesn't matter. They will be fine. They will be in. They will be over the hill and far away. But I think this week is going to be a really interesting test case of what you said. Where is the committee on basically an Indiana team?
Basically speaks to what they rank the SEC over the Big Ten sort of group of 10 teams that are not the top.
And I think it's interesting this year because, and I grew up watching the SEC. Like there have been years where you look at the SEC and there's just so many really good teams and everybody beats each other up a little bit. And at the end of the year,
it doesn't feel like one of those.
No, it doesn't. That's what I was about to say. Like it does not. Like somebody
it's a bunch of powerhouse cannibalizing each other.
But it's not. It's. I'm looking at some of these teams, and Ole Miss was really good tonight, but has shown its flaws at times. Georgia's quarterback situation has kind of gone sideways. Obviously, Alabama has some questionable losses on its resume, and even a couple games that maybe it didn't deserve to win that it did. I think maybe the best way to distill it is what you said is, where does the committee rank the Big Ten next to the SEC? Because if Indiana doesn't fall, or if Indiana, if Georgia falls behind Indiana, if Miami, I guess Miami doesn't matter as much in this conversation, but if Indiana, Penn State, Ohio State, Oregon are all in the top 7 on Tuesday, then I think that is the committee saying the Big Ten's the best conference in the country. And even if you haven't necessarily beaten the best team in the Big Ten, you're going to get credit for being 10-0 in that conference. If Indiana's still staring up at a 2-loss Georgia, or if Indiana gets jumped by some 2-loss, like if Alabama beats LSU and somehow jumps Indiana from 11th.
And it just means, I think, that if they do, like you said, finish 11-1, they probably don't have a path to host if they're going to be behind this week.
No, I think that's fair.
And I think that's a shame because I think my hot take is only that if Indiana's 11-1 at the end of the season, with the way they've won 9 out of the 10 games and probably an 11th or 12th against Purdue, 11th win, 12th game, that they should host a game, that their resume is good enough to host. That's my hot take.
I think that's fair.
It's not even that. I think that's lukewarm. But that's what I just feel like having watched the team that's what they're deserving. But I think you'll see this week if there's a realistic shot at that or not. Because if they're behind Georgia and Georgia wins out and Indiana's 11-1, they're not. Not passing.
I think basically, like, the way to say it is essentially, is the committee, the committee is on the fence to some degree, metaphorically, on Indiana. Are they on the fence but leaning toward Indiana's really good and we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt? Or are they on the fence? Indiana's got to, they haven't beaten anybody. Indiana's got to prove it. And a game like this,
how do you rank?
Really starts to kind of tilt them in the wrong direction.
Because Ward made it basically said, he said, let's see how they do in the next 4 to 5 weeks. And we all want to see how they do in the next 4 to 5 weeks. And so, Ward might be their best data point, right? Maybe he pushes Michigan. He really believes Michigan.
Does he have to step out of the room? I think you have to step out of the room for your own.
He can't help him. So,
but I think we all know that, like, everybody's
wink,
right. Yeah. We'll leave it there. We've gone 26 minutes and change. Indiana 20, Michigan 15. It's still remarkable to me that Indiana's 10-0 and has also beaten both of last year's national finalists. And we're sitting here being like, what does the committee think about Indiana? Like, if someone had told you at the beginning of the fourth quarter of the national title game last year.
But it's like they beat both the national championship.
No, I know. But like,
it's so weird because it's like these teams, this the national championship.
Well, and this wasn't Indiana.
Washington even had less talent. Yeah, I know. But it's like it's so weird year to year. It's like they resemble.
If nothing else, this just kind of gives you a sense for what the new normal is in college basketball and college football, because that's what we were covering.
I was like, wait, you're calling?
It's the new normal in college basketball.
It'll be across the street in 12 hours.
Yeah, like 15 hours. He's Mike Niziolek, Bloomington Herald-Times. I'm Zach Osterman, Indianapolis Star. Thank you all for watching. Thanks for everybody who got involved in the comments. This will be uploaded either tonight or tomorrow on Mind Your Banners. It'll be up tonight on my YouTube channel and up tomorrow on like all the podcast feeds, wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back with probably a short one. I would say we won't go quite as long tomorrow.
Maybe like 5 minutes. We'll just say hello to everybody and hit the road.
And then obviously we'll have our regular show next week. Plus, I think at least one special guest lined up for next week. So stay tuned for that. Until then, thank you so much for watching. We'll talk to you soon.